The combination of genres is very much a make or break situation. On the one hand, you can help better stand out in a time in which the genre in question has to face a lot of stiff competition, but on the other, it can easily lead to some aspects being downgraded due to having to take into account both styles of gameplay. The addition of stealth segments, for example, can always be a frustrating inclusion I find when the game doesn't take into account how to overlap both styles of play. Exhibit A of this being done right? The Sly Cooper series, my friends. A stylish and innovative platformer series that managed to fuse two very different genres together in a time in which platformers were steadily becoming too oversaturated. While the series may not be as relevant as it was back in the early 2000s, it has still retained a following thanks most in part to its charming heroes, despicable villains, creative platforming, along with its memorable cel-shaded art style. The series also had a very unique format to storytelling at the time, with you progressing through each game's story through an episodic format, with each one coming with a plethora of locations, missions and villains throughout. And today for you all, I'm going to be ranking up which said episode stole the show and which one sadly failed to even make a dent on our minds. As per usual, we have a few points and omissions to detail out. For starters, the obvious, this is a ranking of all episodes within each of the 4 Sly Cooper titles. Them of course being Sly Cooper and the Thieves Raccooners, or to those of us inside Europe and Australia, Sly Raccoon, Sly 2 Band of Thieves, Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves, and finally Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. This lands us with 5 episodes from the first game, 8 from the second, 6 from the third, and another 6 from the fourth, leaving us with a very nice round 25 episodes to rank up. With this time I'll be taking into account such things as their art direction, level design, story/villains, and their music. Those who have played a good chunk of the series will likely know the basic Sly series episode structure, with the gang having a set objective and needing to perform tasks so as to better prepare themselves for the final heist. However, the first game kinda goes for a more traditional platformer direction, with you really just needing to complete levels in order to obtain keys so as to unlock the final boss fight. While these kind of differences can at times divide things up on occasion, I say this in regard to both past and future worst to best videos, I found little this time around to make me devalue one game's design choices over the others. At least with the first game. The fourth one, just wait and see. This time around, there's really nothing left out with the exception of the prologues to each game, though I was tempted to leave out the climax to Thieves in Time, seeing as it's just simply referred to as the Paris Prologue, plus a few other things that I'll go over once we get to it. And with that out of the way, let's kick things off with Number 25, Paris Prologue. Oh looky here, the one entry I was tempted to remove just so happens to be at the very bottom. Let me just start by saying that while this episode does a decent job of bringing Sly's ancestors back for the finale so as to fully test our skills with them, some just simply work better than others, and even then they rarely feel as if they are being challenged when compared to the previous game's climaxes. But I'll be honest, this episode is mostly here at the very bottom thanks to just how brainless the story feels at this point. The whole returning back to their time after their mission is complete makes next to no sense. Sly getting captured at the very start makes Murray look like the smart one of the team. And the paradox? Where the hell do I start? He basically foils his own plan in seconds, his motive is just copied over from Clockwork, and even the writers couldn't help but address the fact that he could have easily have won had he simply not interfered with Sly's ancestors. Anything else I miss out? Oh yes, we get the best kind of final boss in a video game with the repetitive quick time events to end things off with. Should I be happy this is the first one on the list, or should I be sad due to it being the last outing we've seen from our heroes in the last few years? Number 24, 40 Thieves. While the Paris Prologue has plenty for me to rip into, a lot of its sins do feel like they were carried over from the previous episode before it. Something about this episode just sort of drains the energy right out of me. Could it be the rather meaninglessness of rescuing Salim's partners? Could it be the lack of attachment to the location or the villain's completely flawed plan? Or perhaps it's the straight up unnecessary belly dance segment with Carmelita that just feels wrong in every way. This to me just feels like the developers were aware of some of the more, well, darker sides to the fandom. Number 23, Fire in the Sky. To me, this episode feels as if it should have hit home, but sadly ends up coming up short-handed. Unlike the previous episodes from Sly 1, it doesn't feel as if it leans into its location's advantages that much. Even the music feels very drab with what Eastern-style tracks they could have come up with. There are some levels that work alright, I guess, but the panicking boss fight can be won in seconds. Number 22, Menace from the North. A complaint I've seen people bring up with the second game is its way of stretching villain stories as well as reusing assets for a second episode. I respectfully disagree with it being a bad decision, as both locations and stories are different enough. With that said, the second Canadian-based adventure does flounder a bit, most in part to a good portion of the missions being based on getting to the next episode after. The location as well just isn't very colourful, which considering it being a lumberyard makes sense, but my point still stands. I do have to give credit to some of the creative platforming throughout, and I do find it humorous that our grand plan in the Lumberjack games is simply for our heroes to cheat. Number 21. Rumble Down Under. When you think of Sly Cooper, Australia is usually not the first location you think of when it comes to him and his friends on their adventures. Similar to the last pick, I don't know whether it was intentional to make the setting as bleak as possible to hammer in a message about the environment, but like before, it ends up making the location just not that appealing. There are some okay missions here, like controlling the big truck and the bar brawl, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who got tired of the evil mask constantly appearing and disappearing with no backstory or schemes for us to uncover. Also, I can't be the only one to notice how messed up it is for the Cooper gang to be feeding miners to a crocodile in order to save the environment. That is unusually dark for this series, I must say. Number 20, Turning Japanese. Bow, 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 bow. While I can admit I personally prefer the more operation-structured episodes from the sequels over the originals ones, I think I would rather the fourth game doing something different rather than the botched attempt they did with some of these episodes' pacings. The location is admittedly gorgeous, it feels all over the place. This is honestly the only episode from the fourth game that I need the map at some point or another. While El Jefe may not be as painfully incompetent as La Paradox or some of the other villains from the fourth game, he does still come out as the most forgettable villain out of the series in my book. Number 19, The Cold Heart of Hate. This climax had lots of potential behind it with both an awesome villain and an intimidating setting. Sadly, however, it ends up feeling way too rushed. What's more, only 2 levels have you doing any platforming, with 3 featuring you controlling a turret of some sort. With that said, I enjoy the thrill of climbing up the sinking death ray. The rocking soundtrack is very different from the rest of the game, and I cannot stress how underrated Clockwork is as video game villains go. Number 18, Clown of the Cave Raccoon. Let me start by saying that the montage minigame here is probably one of my favourite missions in the entire series. With that out the way, let me follow that up with some of the many problems sadly also present here. The convenience scale is cranked up to 11 here. The villain Grizz is just Dimitri but with zero charm to him. The missions with Bob feel like they should have had more to them than just scaling walls, and while the location is indeed very detailed with plenty of prehistoric gags about, it's unfortunate the frame rate has to suffer for it. Number 17, Jailbreak. This is certainly a standout episode, thanks most in part to its neat twist in having Sly and Murray get imprisoned at the end of the last episode, forcing Bentley, the smallest and weakest of the trio, to have to rely on himself. At least at the start anyway. And while I greatly enjoy this change of pace, along with a creepy location to explore, it is unfortunate that his missions are not as inventive as they could be. A lot of them are very slow, and at least 3 of them in particular feel like you are just simply moving around the map to complete repetitive tasks. Because of this, the middle of the episode can fall into a bit of a slump, which is a shame given how good the opening and endings are. Number 16. Sunset Snake Eyes. There's a good balance of decent to pretty alright moments throughout this episode, with rooftops, casinos and scrapyards abound. Like with Fire in the Sky, it would have been nice to have done without the turret and driving sections, but thankfully it makes up for it for a neat grunge escape from New York like atmosphere. Also, there's this line.
Those crummy dogs are pumping me right and left!
Well, get back in there and bang them back.
Number 15, Anatomy for Disaster. The only final episode does not keep you on a linear path. It does an admirable job of having you put your skills with the trio to work, even if many of said missions only really get interesting while in the engine room parts of them. I like the dread that the art design and music provide, and the mission with the Mega Jump Pack is a great way to let you feel all powerful near the end. The biggest complaints I have are with everything that leads to our villain coming to power, as well as just how much it feels like they just copied the finale from the previous game. Number 14, A Cold Alliance. Fittingly enough, this episode has sort of a yin and yang effect to it. On the one side, we get a pretty epic 2-parter fight both above and below a bamboo forest, and we get to see a powerful scene in which the Panda King has to confront his past darker side in an effort to prove his redemption to the man whose father he once killed. On the other end, however, we get a rather odd structure to things this time around that, while different, unfortunately feels too out of place. Not to mention, there are barely any preparations made up for the heist, with even a few missions having almost zero effect on the final result. Some of you may say I put too much focus on these heists, but seeing all your efforts go towards this big finale is one of the series' highlights to me. Number 13, Dead Men Tell No Tales. I'm not sure what to make of this episode on account of the heavy inclusion of the sailing mechanics. I think my feelings for it are about on the same level with those who weren't too keen on the Batmobile in Arkham Knight. It's not that there's anything inherently wrong with it, it's just not what we came for is all. Still, controls are right, and I have to say Lafouille is definitely one of my favourite villains the gang has gone up against. Also, I'd just like to say thank you to the devs for the scuba mission that helped in continuing my ever-growing fears of the sea and everything in it. Number 12, The Predator Awakes. Hey, it's another right in the middle pick that I have trouble talking about because it's mostly just okay all around. For what I can sum up about this episode, it flows relatively well with a few decent missions, but none that are anything to really take note of. The biggest things I do end up walking away with are the difficulty in moving about when you're not Sly, the decent boss fight, the twist ending, and the humorous way of the game censoring drugs with illegal spices. Number 11. The Black Chateau. Ever since that kick-ass opening to Sly 1, the nighttime Paris setting has become synonymous with the Cooper gang. That also applies to the one full episode set in the City of Love. It's hard not for you to think of running across the top of rooftops, walking across suspended lights, and listening to the eerie yet memorable music. With that said, it can feel a bit too basic and handholdy when compared to other opening levels, but even so, it's hard for me not to fall in love with this episode's style, especially when a villain as groovy as Dimitri is featured in it. Number 10. Tide of Terror. The first episode to start the series off is one that manages to help give plenty of levels that utilise Sly's more common abilities, while also offering up one of the few times the barrel disguise is used in some way. Both the engine rooms and sunken wreckage stockpiles are different enough, and the music has become very recognisable with the series. Not bad for being set in a barbaric and uncivilised setting as Wales. Number 9. Go West, Young Raccoon. Now this is a good old western adventure, complete with jailbreaks, carriage chases, and train robberies. Okay, sure, some of those have been done before, and better if I do say so, but there is a good bit of immersion to this location thanks to its setting and awesome music. Tennessee shooting mechanics are different enough from Sly, and I just love the guy's victory pose. The biggest drawbacks for me come with the final mission and its villain Toothpick, who not only feels way too kiddish compared to past villains, but also has one of the lamest secrets I've ever seen for a villain. Oh no, his character model is off scale. Number 8. To Starry-Eyed Encounter. This operation is one that I'm very fond of, most in part to just how impossible the situation looks at first, but it eventually comes together in the end. Albeit maybe a little too convenient that no one seems to notice a suspended hippo stealing 2 giant-ass metal wings in a crowded ballroom, but I can go with it. The nighttime palace setting has a very soothing atmosphere, and while Rajan may not be much of a foe against Sly and the gang, I find the idea behind him interesting, as someone who grew up poor, ended up rich, and felt the need to lavish themselves in order to prove it to themselves more than anyone else. Number 7. Of Mice and Mechs. This location could have just been your standard medieval times knockoff, but they managed to really put a lot of detail into the location, especially with the steampunk inspired designs used throughout. This, of all the episodes in Thieves in Time, feels the best paced, with memorable missions, and I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for this. I honestly didn't mind what they did with the twist here. Sure, they could have gone into more detail, but I thought it kind of made sense for said character. Was it handled the best? Probably not, but I still kind of like the idea behind it all. Number 6. Flight of Fancy. Remind me never to play cards with the Cooper gang, seeing as their first response to any form of competition is to simply cheat. All joking aside, I really enjoy this episode, as the midway for the third game, there's a lot of meat to chew on here. The plan to trick and weaken the other dogfight competitors is really clever, and the location is just as stereotypically Holland as it can get. The flying is fine for what it is, and it's neat to have Mugshot come back, along with one of the best scenes in the series in my opinion.
Look, if you don't got nothing to say nice, then don't say nothing at all. Get it? What? Ain't got no sassy comments, smart guy? Oh, I get it. You got nothing nice to say, so you're keeping quiet. That's real cute. You really got nothing nice to say? That's cold.
Number 5. He Who Tames the Iron Horse. One thing I find hard defending with these Sly games is the open yet rather bare locations, with the bottles and artifacts from Sly 2 and 4 being the closest thing to side quests we get. With that said, there's some fun I think to be had here with this location, most in part to the way the trains circle around the map, as well as just messing around with the local bears. But even with all that, I really enjoy having to pull off multiple heists, with the second one having one of the best action themed tracks I've heard in a video game. Number 4. Vicious Voodoo. Like the Cave of Bad Dreams from Rayman 2, this is one of those levels that really gave me the willies when I was a kid. And while I ever so slightly stepped up my horror gaming experiences, there's still a really good amount of detail put into giving you the chills. Many I'm sure remember the Lair of the Beast most of all for its build up, but this level is also great thanks to plenty of platforming throughout, thanks to the use of vines and branches. Admittedly, the piranha and chicken missions might feel a bit at odds with the spooky atmosphere, however they do help to bring some much needed levity for younger players. My only major complaint is with the final boss fight that really started to piss me off thanks to the lack of depth perception. Although from what I found out, me failing constantly could very easily have been due to the collection not syncing the music right. Number 3. An Opera of Fear. Though I do have a fondness for the iconicness of the first two games' introduction levels, this one ends up coming out on top simply for the fact that it manages to tell a gripping tale while barely forcing you to undertake tedious tutorial missions. What's more, there's quite a few missions that can take surprising turns, with the episode's heist being one of the most entertaining to the point that I would often replay it way back. Number 2. Honor Among Thieves. Despite the linearity to this finale, it feels like a true conclusion to not just the third game, but to the entire series up to this point as well. The missions allow us to all take on one of each team member for one last ride, minus Panda King, for reasons, with the last few as the main trio getting to have some truly heartwarming moments. On top of that, the final gauntlet within the treasure room has you really pulling out every trick in the book, and for once we have a final battle that's not just you stuck on a turret for 5 minutes. And number 1, A Tangled Web. Hey, did you ever want to see the sequel to The Nightmare Before Christmas where the humans take revenge on Halloween Town by going to war against them because, well, this episode can kind of be viewed as that. This location is such a weird mix, and yet it works perfectly for the center point of the second game. The gothic architecture and haunting music shouldn't go so naturally with the mobilized tanks and planes, and yet it perfectly fits in with the crazed yet wonderful world of the Sly Cooper franchise. The heist going off the rails with everyone pulling a Benny Hill also leads to the most energetic climax in almost any episode. And there we have it, my friends. I can only sit and pray that it was to your liking, but as always, I'm interested as to what you consider to be the very best and worst of the Cooper Gang's adventures. I'd like to apologise for taking my sweet ass time with getting this video out the way, as I have a bad habit of trying to multitask various ideas swirling around in my head at the time. At the moment I've got a lot of energy on my side with my next worst to best on its way, as well as something towards the end of the year to commemorate the last 10 years of the games industry we've had to get through. Thank you all once again, and don't forget to like and subscribe to get even more hot cost goodness on the dot.